Good morning. At the end of the year, every year since I started teaching, I've always told a couple stories to my class, life stories to carry with them as they leave and go out into the world and start facing the challenges of the world ahead of them. This is the end of the school year for me, and therefore I didn't want to not get you guys the stories that I tell everybody else. And so this is the only way I can do it on my personal blog. Um, and I'd like to do that now. The first thing I need to let you know is that all year long you've paid attention because you've thought I'm crazy. Um, all the talking to dinosaurs, seeing time portals open up on the floor, having people be there that aren't really there that I hold conversation with. All of those things were designed to keep you interested and in class and pay attention to science and make you wonder and make class more fun. My logic on teaching has always been that if you're laughing, you don't realize you're learning, and if you're laughing and you're learning, then you're learning a lot more than you would if you were just sitting there looking at a book. And most of the time it worked. You'll notice that when you were talking or whatever, if I started talking to the dinosaurs or talking to people who were sitting in chairs that you couldn't see, you'd stop talking and you'd start listening to me and paying attention. And so all of that was an act. That being said, I want to tell you a couple stories. Sitting in my classroom is a fountain, and that fountain sits over on the counter and it has water running through it, and in the fountain are green pebbles. And you've noticed that one of my morning rituals is that I'll always go over and I'll put more water into that fountain so that it's running over those pebbles and it keeps them wet and as they sit there. Those pebbles have seen everything that's gone on in our class. They've seen us go through anger. They've seen us laugh. They've listened to our silly jokes. They've listened to questions. They've paid attention to everything that we've done. And so they've been with us for the entire year. And in fact, they've been with us even longer than that because some of them have been there for multiple years as I teach. So this is only for my 8th graders, my students who are going to be going on. And what I want you to do is I want you to go over to the fountain, and you have a choice. You can take a pebble or you cannot. That's your choice. You get to take one pebble and take it back to your seat with you, and that'll be your pebble. And they look something like this. They're the little tiny green pebbles that you see sitting in the fountain, not the big green rocks. Once you have your pebble, take it back to your seat and hold on to it. And I'm going to tell you a story. My grandpa used to tell me this story whenever I wanted to talk about helping people. And I never thought that I'd become a teacher. I hated school. And then I found that I ended up right where my grandfather said I would be, teaching students. And so my grandfather told me this story. Once, a long time ago, when things were really, really bad for our people, 2 braves set out to try and help the people. And so they loaded their horses down and they decided they were going to head out on a trek and find ways to help the people. Before they left, they prayed to the white buffalo calf woman that she might give them advice or give them some kind of way that they could help the people. And as they prayed, when they looked up, there stood the white buffalo calf woman. And she looked at them both and she smiled. And she said, "As you go out to help the people tomorrow, pick up pebbles and stones. Pick up as many pebbles and as many stones as you can possibly carry. Pick them up every place you see them. And then tomorrow night, when you go to sleep and you make camp, you'll be both sad and you'll be glad in the next morning." And then she disappeared. Well, the one brave made preparations to pick up all the pebbles that he could find. He got as many sacks as his horse could possibly carry, and he started picking up pebbles immediately. But the other brave, well, he was upset. He was angry. And he said, "That's it. Our people are dealing with alcoholism, and child abuse and all these problems that have been thrust upon us. And her advice to us is that we should pick up pebbles. But because she was a Wanagi, a great spirit, he picked up a handful of pebbles and he shoved them into his pocket. As they headed out on their journey, the one brave never picked up any more pebbles. He had the handful of pebbles that he had, and he lamented the entire time that they were on the trip that it was a waste. The other brave picked up as many pebbles as he could possibly carry until his pockets were full of pebbles, and then he took his shirt off and tied the sleeves closed and the neck closed, and he filled it with pebbles, and he filled all the sacks with pebbles that he could possibly carry, until the night when they arrived at their campsite and they started to make camp. He collapsed from exhaustion. He couldn't even take the time to set up the tent. He just laid there next to the pebbles laying on the ground. Well, in the morning, when they woke up, standing in front of them was the white buffalo calf woman. As she stood there, she looked at them smiling, and she said, "Today's a great day because now you'll be able to help your people." She said, "You'll be both happy and you'll be sad." And when they looked at the pebbles that they had, they found that every single pebble had turned into a chunk of gold. And the one brave who picked up a handful of pebbles, well, he was immediately sad because he realized that had he listened to her, he could help a great many people, but he was only able to help a few. But he was also happy because he could help a few people. And the other brave, well, he was very happy because he realized with all the pebbles that he picked up that are now gold, he could help a whole lot of people. But he also had a hint of sadness about him because he realized that he could have worked through the night. He could have ignored the pain and exhaustion that he felt, and he could have picked up even more pebbles so he could help more people. That's what I've done for you this year. Since the very first day of class, when you walked in, I've laid pebbles on your desk. And some of you have taken those pebbles in the form of lessons or jokes or little sayings or smiles, and you've taken those pebbles with you when you've left the class. And you've kept them. And some of you, well, because I'm a teacher and you want to be respectful, you take those pebbles with you, but as soon as you leave the class, you get rid of them. You just throw them away because after all, it's just a pebble. And some of you, you pick up every single pebble that I've given you, and you have them stored someplace. Okay? And it's my hope that someday, when you need it the most, you're going to find that instead of a pebble, you've got pieces of gold. And so now you have your very own green pebble. All right? And I want to tell you a story about these green pebbles. I've handed these out for every year. Before that, I used to make feathers for students. About, I think it was 2005. I was teaching at a school, and I got a call that came through. The secretary put a call through, and there was a voice on the other end of the phone. And that person said, "Is this Mr. Allison, who used to teach at the school?" I said, "Well, yeah, I used to teach at that school. Why?" And he said, "Well, you're probably not going to remember my name, and even now I don't remember his name. He told me his name and I forgot." He said, "But I wanted to tell you that, remember those pebbles you used to give us?" I said, "Yeah, I still give those pebbles out." He said, "Well, I got into a fight with my girlfriend the other night and we broke up. And I went out with my friends and I got really drunk. And after getting really drunk, I came home and I was going to kill myself. And so I got into the closet in my house and I was going to make a rope and put it up over the bar. And I got up on a chair. And when I got up on the chair and looked over on the shelf, there was that stupid green pebble you had given us sitting on the top shelf. And I started to cry. And then I got down and I realized finally what you meant when you gave us those pebbles. I never thought anything of it, but that's when I found my chunk of gold." And I said, and I'm glad that you did. I want you to hold on to the pebbles that I've given you. All right? They do mean something, and they will help you get through life. And with that, I'm going to finish with the story that I always tell at the end of the year. And that story is called The Lesson. And you have to excuse me because normally I read this in person, and so it's a little bit, harder to read this way. On Robert's first day at school, he had a wonderful time. He swung on the swings, he sang with the other children, he listened to the stories. He loved sitting at a desk and smelling new paper and touching new pencils, and his teacher was very, very nice. And that's Robert. One day Robert's teacher said, "Children, it's time for our lesson. We're now going to learn how to solve a problem. 1 + 1 = what?" Robert was very curious and listened carefully while the teacher explained. Then he raised his hand and said, "The answer's 2." "Right," said the teacher, and Robert was very happy because he had solved the problem. The next day, when the teacher started talking about solving a problem, Robert just stared out the window at a bird that was hopping on a nearby branch because he already knew how to solve a problem. But when his eyes went to the blackboard after the bird flew away, he saw written there, 2 + 2. "What?" Robert looked at his teacher in surprise. "Another problem?" "Oh, Robert," the teacher said, twinkling as if she had some marvelous secret, "this is just the beginning. There are lots and lots of problems." Robert sighed. Then he listened as the teacher explained, and he raised his hand, and he said, 4. "Right," said the teacher, and Robert smiled because he had solved 2 problems. Every day when Robert went to school, there were more and more problems to solve, and sometimes Robert said to himself, "This is not fun." But his teacher told him he had to do it anyway, because what he was there for was to learn, and he could have fun at recess and lots of fun after school. And she said, though Robert did not believe her, that after he had solved lots of problems, he would feel even happier than when he slid down the slippery slide. So one by one, Robert solved the problems. And after he solved them, he smiled. And he moved up a grade. Then one day the teacher said, "We're now going to do story problems." "Oh boy," said Robert, "this sounds like fun." He liked stories, so he listened carefully. "If you're outside playing," said the teacher, "and you have 3 cars and 1 truck, and Joey comes along and grabs 2 cars and the truck, how many times should you hit Joey?" Robert thought and thought. 2 times, he said. "Wrong," said the teacher. 3 times, said Robert. "Wrong," said the teacher, and she looked at him with soft, expectant eyes. Robert puzzled over this for a little while. Then his hand shot up and he said brightly, "I know, no times." "Right," said the teacher, and Robert smiled because he had solved another problem. Robert grew bigger and bigger, and so did his problems. Oh, he loved recess, and he played ball and roller skated with friends after school and had the best time. And the teacher saw to it that they sang and drew pictures and had lots of fun in class. But always there came the problems. And sometimes he slumped down at his desk and said, "I'm not enjoying this. Why are you punishing me with all these problems?" And Robert's teacher, now twinkling as if the secret were even more wonderful, answered, "Oh, Robert, I'm not punishing you. It's just that you've moved up a grade and are ready for harder problems. And here comes one now." Robert held on to his desk with both hands and squeezed his eyes shut and listened. And that's Robert. Robert, if you ride your bicycle 2 blocks east and 3 blocks west, and you fall off and break one leg, is it your fault, or the bicycle's fault, or the sidewalk's fault, or your parents' fault because they gave you the bicycle for your birthday last August? And do you ever ride a bicycle again? And what do you do while you're lying in bed and can't go out to play? Robert worked on that one for a long time, and it was not fun at all. But he finally got it right, and his teacher smiled. Robert was proud of himself, and he smiled too. And the teacher moved him up another grade. One day, as Robert was gazing out the window at the raindrops that were making puddles on the sidewalk and thinking what a great splash he could make, he heard his teacher say, "Robert, if your family moved to a small house in a big city, and you had to leave behind 2 aquariums and 1 dog and your best friend." "Oh no," interrupted Robert. "I don't want that problem. Give me a different problem." "But I can't," said the teacher. "This is your problem, and you must solve it." So Robert worked on it, and cried a little, and finally, after some time had passed, he found that he had solved the problem, and he smiled, and it felt good. And the teacher moved him up another grade. Robert had a long summer vacation and played and played and played, and when it was time to go back to school, he was ready. For a while, Robert was given some very simple problems, like, "Robert, if you take 5 minutes longer in the shower and 4 minutes longer on breakfast, how long will it take you to walk to school because the bus already left?" But one day, Robert could hardly breathe as he heard the teacher say, "Robert, if you were a teenager and you were not doing well in school, and you were not popular, and you had pimples all over your face, and your parents were getting a divorce, and you thought it must be your fault, and you felt that life was the pits, would you A, take drugs to make the pain go away, B, kill yourself, C, hate your father, or D, think of another solution?" "Oh no," said Robert, hiding under his desk. "I can't do that one. I like the problems about oranges and bananas in the grocery store, or missing the bus. This one is too hard. Why are you punishing me?" "I'm sorry, Robert," said the teacher kindly. "You're a big boy now, and you have big boy problems. Now come out from under your desk and solve it. You're here to learn." So Robert slowly came out and studied the problem and frowned and even dropped a few tears onto his wooden desk. He didn't get it right the first time, but the teacher was patient and saw to it that Robert had some extra loving attention. And at last Robert leaned back and said, "Whew, that was a tough one." "It was indeed, Robert," said the teacher, "but you solved it, and I'm proud of you." Robert had thought he might never smile again, but finally he did smile, and on the way home from school, he noticed that the sky was bluer than he ever remembered seeing it, and he moved up to the next grade. And that's the bird that Robert saw in the sky. Robert's teacher gave him all kinds of problems, and he eventually learned it was no use to hide under his desk or to tell her no or to yell. They were his problems, and he would have to solve them. And sometimes a new one came before the last one was finished. There was recess, and there were weekends, and there were long holidays, but always the bell would ring, and there was his teacher with a new problem. And as soon as he got it solved, you guessed it, he was moved up to the next grade. And it felt good. You can see that Robert's getting older. Robert, if you had 7 dates with one girl and fell in love with her, and 4 months later asked her to marry you and she said no, and you felt like a complete zero. Robert, if you really wanted to go to college and it cost $5,000 and you had only $2,000. Robert, if your wife, who was really a very good woman, had 10 habits that drove you absolutely crazy and was 30 pounds overweight and spent half her time on things that were important to her but not to you. Robert, if you had 3 children and one of them was born with a birth defect that added to your sorrows because it subtracted from her possibilities and divided your attention and multiplied the problems of caring for your family. Robert, if you knew that your boss at work was cheating 45 people in 7 states in 12 different ways, and if you said anything, there would be a 90% chance you would lose the best job you ever had. Robert, if you wake up 14 mornings in a row wondering if it were worth it to get out of bed because you felt like you'd been giving 100% to 24 people and getting only 30% in return, and you felt yourself going down and down and down, and your brother's house went up in flames, and your wife's mother was in a terrible accident, and your daughter wanted to marry a jerk, and the pollution thickened, and the ozone thinned. Robert sat at his desk for years and years and did his best. And everyone who loved him gathered around and encouraged him. But they knew they could not do Robert's homework for him, for these were his problems, and they each had problems of their own, and Robert encouraged them. But the only problems he could really work on were his. And when he couldn't solve a problem, no matter how hard he tried, the teacher was very patient and smiled and said, "That's all right, Robert. We'll come back to that one some other time." Gradually, Robert stopped trying. Robert stopped saying, "Oh, why are you punishing me with all these problems?" For he knew he was there to learn, and he learned that learning made him happy, and he found that he smiled a lot, and he moved up from one grade to the next. And that's Robert. One day, when Robert was a very old man and sometimes dozed off in the classroom, the teacher startled him by saying, "Robert, if your body had 3 heart attacks and 1 missing kidney, and you got weaker and weaker until you could hardly breathe, how much would you have loved? And who would remember you after you were gone?" Robert swallowed hard and sat up, straight at his desk, and worked on it. Suddenly he realized that all the lessons he had been learning all his life had really only been one lesson, that all the problems he had been working on all his life had really only been one problem. This problem. Robert, how much do you love? Finally, he leaned back and sighed and smiled, and the teacher smiled, and Robert moved up to the next grade. I've spent an entire year with you, actually 2 with this group, and I want you to know that I care. All of the things that I've said to you have been because I care. And the last thing I want to say to you as you go out in the world is be excellent to each other. Thank you for the honor of letting me teach you